CX, available for CX and UX consulting, projects, and training. Contact us for a free consultation.
Oops. Hi, everybody. Oops, I cut right to this. How exciting. Okay, so hi, everybody. It's me, Debbie Levitt from Delta CX. Welcome to episode 53 of our podcast. Let me see if I can go back to a giant picture of me for a moment before I reveal today's exciting... Oops, what happened to me? Let's see. Can I get... Is this me? Okay, that looks like me. Hi, it's me. Oops. That's what happens when you're your own show producer. So I want to welcome everybody to the show. This is Making Physical Products Digital. It is June 29, 2020. I hope everybody's been safe and healthy wherever you are. And we're going to be meeting with Matteo, of course, as you saw the little preview. But first, I'm going to be reminding everybody, first of all, won't you please subscribe to my wonderful YouTube channel, Delta CX, and you can also join Slack at deltacx.link/join Slack. Now, I'm using a new microphone today, so if it sounds really terrible, let me know, and I won't have time to change it today. So I pulled an old mic out of my box of tricks, and here is something else I pulled out of my box of tricks. I pulled out my Tascam 688 MIDI Studio, which I got in 1993, which is also when I became a certified sound engineer. And I want to show everybody a little bit about what this does. Because we're going to be talking about making a physical product like this into a digital one. So just so you have a little bit of the lingo, and I know people who are listening audio only and don't see the screen, you can't see it, but this is a giant mixing board for music and sound. And basically, each little vertical stripe is called a channel. So imagine that a microphone is plugged into channel 1. Now I've got all these little knobs and things, and that slidey thing on the bottom, it has a name. It's called a fader. And always use this finger. And then all the little things that you see that are all these knobs are things like volume or equalizer, or sometimes they are what are called effects sends, which means I want to send the microphone out to an effect like a reverb or something funky you guys are used to hearing on the songs you listen to. And then also pan, which is how much is it in your left or right ear or speaker. So you've listened to music, you've noticed these things. This is how an engineer, sound engineer, a mixing engineer makes them happen. So that is your short lesson on these things today. And now we are going to meet Matteo, who's going to tell us how to make something like this into a digital product. Welcome, friend of the show, Matteo. And remember, everybody, we're live. Please leave your comments and questions in YouTube and LinkedIn. I am watching live. Matteo, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Debbie. Thank you for having me. And yeah, actually, it's amazing to be here after watching a few of your podcasts. Today we're going to try to explain what.
But who are you?
We're going to move. Who I am? Yeah,
yes.
who I am? I don't know.
Where have you been? How do you know what you're doing?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm Italian, as you know. Me and Debbie are playing a lot with this double English and Italian side of us. Like 5 years ago, I moved to England. So I'm now based in Manchester, or near Manchester. I'm an experience designer working with Barclays Corporate at the moment. Previously, I've been the head of design for Minders Consoles, and this is what we are going to talk about today. My background is quite crazy. I actually like that in our past and in our background, me and Debbie were musicians, both of us. So I've been an oboist, and then I did the university, my degree in musicology, so not a designer, as background in the studies. Then I've been a consultant for years, in IT consultant, coder and product manager for a company in Italy. And then I made that big jump to the design world, the design domain, that is actually, I discovered is a big passion, and I can't stop to think about it every single moment. Yeah, this is the long background in just a short minute.
I'm not timing you.
Perfect? Yeah, perfect.
You can say whatever you
Yes,
want. We've
not
got an
timing.
hour. We've got time.
We've got time. Yeah, well, we're going to talk quite a lot about products and physical products, which is quite amazing for me, because I spent more than 4 years working on a big mixing console, the switching. Actually, it was already a product that was partially digital, because the mixing console moved to the digital world in the end of the 80s. But we are moving a lot quickly close to full digital product. And actually, this podcast, talking with Debbie, started from the images we saw maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, when the Dragon spacecraft
SpaceX
flight away, and we saw so many pictures about these crazy differences between the Apollo design, the space shuttle design, and now the new more or less only screens design, interaction design for the cockpit for that spacecraft. And I said, why not to talk about these arguments, because this topic is quite interesting. We are moving fast towards a world where the screens are taking the ownership on the management of the driving products like spacecraft, airplanes,
Do you want me to
cars,
show your Miro
and
board?
also mixing consoles. We can go to our Miro boards if you want, yes.
Okay.
So we can drive a bit and describe a bit what happened. So if you go to the spacecraft, and we can increase the size on that area.
Wish me luck.
So we can see where we started. Yeah.
Let's see.
Just
Airplane,
waiting for
spacecraft. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
And we'll have
So
to
we can
describe this
see-
for people who are listening audio only. So
Yeah.
describe.
Exactly. So what is interesting is that for a long time, like the Apollo was flew in the 69, as we all know. And then if we can go to the next picture, just a bit down, that is the space shuttle flew for the first time in 1987. But if we are looking at the differences between the two interfaces, there are not so many differences. There are a bunch of buttons, actually a big bunch of buttons, and a lot of instruments. And you actually need to remember, as a pilot, every single item, what it is doing, and they are placed in a big area in front of you, and they are quite expensive in terms of space used and also of weight, etc., etc. And this is probably the main reason we are moving towards a more digital world, where we can save a lot of space, because we can have a lot of screens that are showing information when needed, and actually we can hide information that are not needed in the specific moment of the flight, etc., etc. It is super interesting to see that it happens more or less the same if you go to your right hand side in the airplane's cockpits. Since the first one that we have here, that is from the 1916. Actually, this is one of the early airplanes, and you had like a baseball cloche.
Yes, that's a baseball
It was
stick
super-
to drive
yeah,
it,
it's actually exactly.
and just a bunch
exactly.
of gauges.
Exactly. So it was super simple, but just through the time to improve this security and to manage many things there, because the airplanes went a lot more complex. They just added buttons and buttons and buttons and some screen and buttons and buttons and some screen. If you go down, until now, they didn't change too much. They just added extra controllers. But in the end, the interfaces are quite similar. What does it mean? It means that for pilots and companies that have to manage a company that, that you have to pay for teaching pilots to drive that airplanes, just changing things could be dangerous and expensive. So partially the slow changes that we are seeing in those areas are based on that, because of course I don't want to pay another time, I don't know how much it costs. It costs for teach a pilot to drive an airplane. But if we see like this is from the 1963, the DC-9 that was one of the most known airplanes until the 80s. The class are the same, that the class that we have now on the Boeing or on the Airbus airplanes. They are very similar. They got the pedals. They've got a bunch of buttons on top, on the bottom, etc., etc. Also on the left and the right, we can see them from this picture. More or less, they are all the same. So a pilot that is moving between the different airplanes more or less have an idea of what expecting. Whether if you are changing completely the behavior you can have, so everything is hidden behind a screen, you have to move between different screens and menus, etc. Everything starts to be more complicated because you have to learn new things. If you go to the last one, that is a concept from, it's like the sixth one. Okay, so this is for an helicopter. I also saw something similar for airplanes, but they removed the videos and the pictures from the web, so I don't know the reason exactly. So if you see in this concept, they more or less removed everything rather than a tiny joystick to manage the helicopter in the center of the entire view and the entire interface. Just to be clear, interfaces in this case is everything. It's not only the view, it's everything. So buttons, faders, screens, everything is part of the interface for a pilot in this case.
And just quickly, for the people who are listening audio only, I just want to describe what we're seeing because it's so different from all of the walls and ceilings of switches and gauges that we saw from the earlier airplanes. This one's a helicopter concept, and it's similar to the SpaceX in that it's got kind of 3 screens and a little bit of manual buttons and controls in the middle, but mostly it's 3 touch screens, and it also looks like they've put the seats in maybe a similar zero-G sort of position. So just a little description for the people who are going audio only. So back to you. Tell us how we get there.
Just before telling that, we can move a bit on the left. So going back to the spacecraft, we can see the SpaceX stuff. Up above a bit. There are 2 views. So this is the last one. If we go up above a bit, as well, there is the previous version of it. So in 2017, they presented the first view of the interface, and we can also see how much they changed the interface. And again, for who can't see it, the first version of the Space Dragon interface had a center element with physical buttons and a physical rotary in the middle, and 4 screens, 2 on the left and 2 on the right. Whether if you are going to the 4th view in the bottom, the last version of it had 3 screens and a bunch of buttons in just a big line in the bottom of the 3 screens. It's not so visible.
It's hard to see, but you can see there's a line of buttons underneath the 3 screens. And they also made the screen smaller, I think, because the earlier version had very tall, long screens that looked like they had lists and lists of information that might be overwhelming. And here it looks like they tried to simplify the screens.
Yeah, it would be super nice to see the research they did. Unfortunately, it's not available. but you can see how much it changed, that you can guess a bit of things like hiding complexities because they already have too many information. Surely they have too many information from the headphones they have, from the lights they have, and also, of course, from the screens, etc. Actually, you can also think that they can't see outside the spacecraft in this case. So everything they know is through the screens, through those screens, which is important as well. What is important is that they are touch screens, and the two spacemen have big gloves. So I wonder how they can interact. Surely, of course, they've got something, but how easy is to interact with the screen? I don't know at all. Maybe it's something that has got some wearable control, so they just detect what the different position of the hands are doing, etc., etc. I don't know if they've got any gesture recognition tool on board. That's something that we have to guess about. Even the buttons, they are not so visible in this view. They are very tiny, at least when I was looking in the live presentation when the actual spacecraft started. The buttons looked very, very tiny, and also the curves that the button had looked not so big. So I don't know how feedback the spacemen have when they touch the buttons. And we are going quickly to something that is more related with what I did with mixing consoles. This way, just before moving to the mixing console, the last bit is about something more. It is more probable that we are going to tackle ourselves. That is something related with cars, because already have cars where a lot of buttons has been removed, like in the Tesla one, where we've got extra interfaces, etc., etc. And if we are looking at the cars, also cars until the 2010, more or less, didn't change so much. So from the first Model T to the, which was quite a simple one, to the, I got here an example with the first version of the Volkswagen Golf, 1974, and then I've got a Mercedes example on the end of the 90s. The dashboard of a car didn't change too much. You had your steering wheel, you had, sorry?
No, I'm agreeing with you.
Debbie? Yeah, so, just some extra buttons in the end, extra controls. In the cars after the 2010, more or less, we all have, in all the cars, you have a bigger screen in the middle of the cockpit of your dashboard. This was the big change until the Tesla went out in the 2017 with the new Model 3 that we can see down, where they removed more or less everything from the dashboard. You can agree, disagree, you can think about different things. What Elon Musk replied to many people that say, oh, I can't drive a car without looking at how fast I am and stuff like that. He replied, you need to see it if you're in a taxi. That was his reply. So he completely changed the perspective, which is something that someone is able and ready to take on board, and someone is not. The last example, so I'm not explaining how the Tesla Model 3 looks like, because I think that everyone knows it. It has been on Twitter, on all the newspapers.
Yeah, it's just a giant.
For more or less 1 year.
It used to be a giant tall screen, and now it's a giant wide screen, and there's almost no other buttons on the whole thing. So it's just like a giant iPad in the middle of your front of your car.
Exactly. So the last example about cars I took here is I wrote it wrongly. It's Byton, not Bytom.
Okay.
M-Type that has been released last year and presented last year in Frankfurt, which is an interesting. It's not a concept. This is a car they are already selling. So it's something that is on the market, at least in China. I don't know if it's already in Europe and in the US. it has a big wide screen in front of the entire front screen of the car.
Yeah, where I would
and
expect to
you
see
can
the road. How do you see the road?
exactly. But actually, this picture is. I saw a few videos. The picture is taken from the bottom of the car. It's not when you are driving. You can see up above from the
Okay.
screen, but still is quite distracting because it's super big. You can control the screen from the center of the steering wheel, where you've got like a sort of iPad or stuff like that, and
Right.
or from the center control where you got another control of it. And also, which is interesting, is in the middle. I don't know if you can move the mouse, but there is an element here that looks like a tiny mountain. I don't know how to explain it, what it is. It's exactly in the middle of the dashboard, and this is a gesture recognition tool, so you can move your finger to increase or decrease the volume, and or tap to
So you're making hand
press a
shapes
button.
in the air.
Exactly. So you are turning your finger up and turning your finger left and down and right to turn the volume and stuff like that.
I would totally start
I don't know
debating
how
you on all of this, except I totally want to talk about mixing boards.
I'm going to the mixing board because this is something we tested.
Ooh.
So we tested something on mixing consoles, and not only mixing consoles, with gesture recognition tools, which are not there yet, not ready for something that should be so reliable as a live mixing console, because this is another difference we have to talk about before going to the mixing console itself. So there are a different kind of mixing console. There are mixing consoles for studio, a mixing console for live, a mixing console for broadcast, and etc. etc. So the one I was working is a mixing console for live, which means that it is what the sound engineer is using during a concert, or during a gig, or during a theater, or during a show. It means that the sound is coming through the mixing console and is going out to the speakers live. If the mixing console fails, the gig is gone. So luckily we didn't have live in our control, like if you drive up an airplane, but we had like the live of a concert in our hands. So it should be super reliable, and there are a lot of issues related with that. In this presentation in Miro, I placed a bit of example of the story of mixing consoles. So where we started, and the first picture, just to explain it to the others, is a mixing console that went from the 50s and 60s, and is the one that the Beatles used to record their LPs at that time. And as you can see, there are just a bunch of faders that actually were, I don't know how to explain in the English.
And I don't know if I will have Italian around mixing console words.
But anyway, it is super understandable. They were like faders and knobs with steps, so you couldn't just move the volume or the pan with a fine tune, but you should go with steps and stuff like that. And that console had only 8 input channels, and it was massive. And actually, it was an entire desk with a boot in the bottom. You needed 10 people to move it. So it was nothing that was that is in our mind usable right now in the 2020. If we go down to the next version of it, so what happened during this is what Debbie presented before, more or less. So the analog world didn't change anything. It just added extra channels that are the vertical lines that Abbey explained before. So this console that we can see here had 48 channels. It means that you needed 48 faders, and for each fader you have a lot of buttons and knobs you can manage, and everything you are managing there is one parameter for that channel. In the middle there is a bit of extra stuff, but this was one of the biggest consoles in the analog era, and you again needed at least 8 people to move it. So it is very difficult to use it for the 2020 tours where you have to move quickly from one place to another one. And it's also super expensive because every single element has got is an audio input. It means that if you need more than 48 audio input, you need 2 consoles, etc., etc. What changed completely the paradigm is the advent of the digital world, because the digital world permits us to hide information and to put on the physical area just a few information, the information you need, so we can have a lot more channels in a smaller area. We changed completely the sound productions, both live and also studio in the end. This is a picture of the first digital console. That is a Yamaha DMP7. Super tiny, is just 8 channels. But if we have a look at the size of this one and the size of the Beatles one, that are 8 channels both, the difference is quite massive. For who can't see the pictures, this console is more or less big as a double of an iPad Pro or something like that. It's not heavy at all. You can just take it on and off. What is interesting is that even if it is digital, there is just a tiny screen, and everything else is still completely analog. And this is where the paradigm that sound engineers are used to have in their mind. They can't change it completely. So they are used to have the faders, they are used to have some buttons, they're used to see the meters that are going up and down to show the level of the volume of the channel that is passing through the audio, etc., etc. And this is something that for them is super important, because this is what they're lifesavers. This is where they see if something is going wrong, and they can quickly act to move like the fader down if there is some clamps in the guitarist or stuff like that, which is super important during the live concert. The difference between the first one, and all the other consoles that went after this one in the digital era, is just how big they are, how many channels they have in the count. And in the end, starting more or less from the 20s, 2000s, I don't know in English, it was better because 20s is now. They started to add screens. So if we go to the next one, this is an XL8, and the sound engineer, you can see that the back is Big Mick, who's the sound engineer for the Metallica group. And the difference between this console and the previous one, rather than for the size and the big screens you have in the bottom, is minimal. You've got just a lot more channels and a lot more extra features, like more plugins you can place, and you can manage the audio that the audio can go through different steps before going out to the speakers or stuff like that. But in the end, the consoles are very, very similar as a concept. Screens now so those screens are not touch screens. you can interact with those screens only with these two rolled
Wheels.
mouses you have in the bottom. So there are like the scrolls. You must scroll up and down. And so the screens were more or less more for double check what was happening and to
And the
because
meters.
you couldn't see. Yeah, exactly, for the meters and to move through the plugins. If you see in the fourth screen from the left, there is a plugin list. So this is like a version of a rack where because and this is coming back to something I'm going to talk about after about this humorphism that you have still in the audio industry. So everything that is in the screen looks like something that was real because in the sound engineer mind, a plugin like a reverb you told before was a physical element that you put it in a rack, you put a cable in, a cable out, and you had reverb that was coming into the sound. The digital era created the opportunity to create also virtual plugins. So you have the opportunity to use both the physical one and a virtual one. And actually, the more we are going forward, the more we are adding virtual plugins to the consoles. And this actually is one of the biggest changes we are seeing and we've been seeing since 2010, more or less. The next one is the
2014.
biggest console so 2014. If you look at the difference between this one and the previous one, that was the 2005. 2005. I forgot to. Probably I removed the.
It's okay. I believe you.
The date. So the big difference is a lot smaller. The channel count is bigger, and the interaction you can have within the screens is bigger, but it's very, very similar as a concept within the previous one.
And are those virtual racks I see on the right? Are those virtual
Yes.
racks?
Yes,
All right, so
those
let
are
me
all
explain
virtual
that to
racks,
people.
yeah.
Hold on. So just so people, especially if you're musicians or you've played with GarageBand, if you've ever brought in an effect to your music, like to make it repeat, which could be an echo or really what's called a delay, or if you gave it reverb so it sounds like you're in a big church or something, you always, in the old days, you had to buy a machine and you had to buy a cable and you had to plug it in and that created the effect. But when we started doing more digital recording in the 90s and 2000s, you started having virtual racks, and very often, as Matteo was saying, they were all skeuomorphic in that they were designed to look exactly like the racks they replace. And if you're a musician now and you use some digital tools, you'll notice sometimes they have fake knobs and they have fake other things because people are so used to using them from the old school ways that they never redesigned something that made more digital sense. So a lot of the board is still the same in that you have the channels and what we call the buses, but the back right, for those looking at the video, are going to be like each of those little boxes. One's red and one's white and one's green. They're going to represent different effects that they can put on the music.
Yeah, exactly. It is super interesting to notice that this is something that is super a psychological point for the sound engineers. They need to know they are using a knob because they are used to do that. They are feeling it, and actually, it is super interesting that if a digital plugin looks like the original physical one, they think that sounds better. But actually, in a digital world, you can just place anything in the screen and play with some numbers, and it works. But if it looks like the old version of it, the old nice physical version of it, an analog version of it, it sounds good. If it's not, it doesn't sound good.
It's
and
crap.
actually, you can test it, and they will. Exactly. They will tell you that it sounds different, even if
That's
it is
funny.
exactly the same thing. No, I'm joking. Actually, there are a lot of sound engineers that has got up an ear I can't. Actually, I can't hear what they can hear, which is interesting as well because they are so expert in that domain that they can control a lot of things that we can't normal humans can't hear and can't control. But in the end, the sound that they are creating is perfect. And if we are trying to do the same, we are not able to do it. I tested it because after 4 years, I was able to play a lot with the console. I was not able to take out the same sound.
Can I go to the next
and
picture?
Now we are going. Yes. Now we are going where we are now.
2020.
So this is
the future.
So this is the console I've been working on for 4 years. It's been announced this year and will be released probably in the end of the year. I'm not sure about the exact date because with the COVID stuff, everything has been delayed. The big change here is that we changed completely the paradigm of the console. So if before it was the hardware that was driving the software, now it's the opposite. It's the software that is driving the hardware. So the hardware can be completely removed, that you can drive the console from the screen completely.
I have so many questions because I'm sure to everybody else this looks like the space capsule, but to me this makes sense. So I see on the left side you've got 16 channels. Does that mean that you can use the screen to go to different pages and those same 16 faders are going to represent different instruments or different inputs based on what screen you're on?
Of course, yes.
Don't say of course. Look at what I own.
Yes. You can configure the console more or less how you want. And the faders are, and if you are going back to all the other consoles, you every time I've got a bunch of 8 faders. And the reason that you can use only 8 fingers to move them at the same time, because the thumbs are not usable for that. And so there are 2 banks of 8 faders, just to describe it to who can't see it. On the left-hand side, 1 bank of 8 faders plus 1 bank of 4 faders on the right-hand side. But how those faders are managing your channels is up to you. So the entire hardware is configurable based on what you want to have and what you want to see. The screen can be a mirror of the faders you have in the bottom, or can be a completely different bunch of other 16 faders. So if you want, you can have in front of you 28 plus other 16 faders. So you can have, what is the amount of that? 44 channels in front of you. The 42, 44, I don't remember, I don't know. It doesn't matter exactly. But this console can have 240 channels.
And is this console designed for live, studio, or both?
Live.
Okay.
It's particularly for live. You can use it in studio as well, but it's been designed with live in mind. There are a lot of things that cannot be done in any previous console. For instance, one of the biggest pain points for a sound engineer is what I mentioned before, a clip channel. So when a channel is clipping, it means that it makes like the guitar is like, it sounds.
Or think about feedback. We've all been to a concert where something started going.
Exactly. So this console is able to show you if a channel is clipping, even if the channel is not in front of you in a specific area, and you can quickly, just with a one tap, go to that channel and move the fader or mute it or whatever you need to do. It seems easy, but this is the first time we saw it. We saw something like that. We also added a first iteration. When I left, there were the first iteration of that. So we added an AI stuff to the console, which analyze the sound that is coming through the channel and say to you which instrument is it, and also propose to you different ways to equalize it and to compress it, engage it, etc., which saves a lot of time when you have to set up the console, particularly at the beginning, or where you are in a festival environment where you've got a continuous change of bands, so you have to adapt to different bands quickly and the sound the bands they want, etc. Something like that will really help, because you receive the sound, you don't know which channel is what, and the console automatically recognizes it. Extra step in the future that we were thinking when I left the company, where we can also ask you how you want to reorder the channels, because the console can reorder all the channels for you. So I don't know, maybe you want all the drums for the first channel, then you want the guitars, then you want the vocals, etc. And even if you put the instruments in more or less as it by a chance or by a case, the console can reorder it for you. So that was one idea for the next step
I'm
of it.
going to jump in, because I could listen to you for half a day, because this is like so my world. I used to do live sound. I used to tour with a band. This is a big thing for me, and I have like a million questions in my head about this, but I know they're probably boring to the people listening. So since the people listening are probably mostly UX practitioners or hoping to get into UX, and knowing we only have about 20 minutes left, can I convince you to talk a little bit more about some of the UX approaches that went into creating something like this? What type of research, what type of testing, how do you prototype or interaction design this?
Actually, I didn't realize we spent already 40 minutes on that.
Yeah, it's we got like 15 minutes left, and I would be telling people hey, don't forget to ask questions, but we've just been giving people background.
It is the first time I'm talking about that, so I'm too excited. Sorry for everyone.
And I'm super excited. I'm like, I have a million questions, and don't forget to subscribe, everybody. I have a million questions, but none of them are about UX, and so I'm going to say nothing, but I bet people want to know things like, how do you do the UX work around this? And did you have to have any special training or education or knowledge of studios or recording to get into something like this?
Of course, it will help, but I didn't have any recording studio or anything like that past in my background. I knew something about music. I already manage a mixing console, but just looking at people that were playing with it, if I can say play, but they were working with it. But I never managed a mixing console by myself before, so I was not a sound engineer when I started this project. What is super interesting, so the reason I actually wanted to talk about that is to show all of us as designers, the UX designer, UI designer, that it exists a big, even if it's still small, area of study and development, and that is completely separated from what we every day see on the web. So websites or e-commerce or apps. So there are softwares, and there are also physical tools that now are going to be digital, and they need a lot of our work. And actually, there is a big research to do in this area, because when I started to look at this console for the first time, I didn't find any article about anything related with that. So the only studies I found were university papers or research papers for ergonomics, or stuff related with aeronautics, particularly military stuff in the US, and something from the Microsoft team that they did a lot of research, and they still are doing a lot of research in those areas. But it's difficult to find those information out of Microsoft. Probably, if you can work in Microsoft, you probably will be able to find a lot of them. I was not. So you have to rely on not too many resources, and you have to test it a lot with the users. But many times when you are working on those kind of projects, it happens to me as well. Those projects are more or less secret. So only a specific bunch of clients, selected clients can come to your site and being demoed about the project, the prototype you have, and they can play with the console, or in this case, the console, in the state it is. I was super lucky because I was able to be part of all those demos and to make questions to the users, etc., etc. I know for a matter of fact that in other companies, there are designers, but they can't access those demos because those demos are for sales, marketing, etc., but not for the designers. I was super lucky because I was part of them. And also my team was part of the demos, and it was important for us to see how actually the user interacted with the console. We made a lot of prototypes about it, and this is another area that is super interesting because a product like that one, if you think the Tesla it probably is the same. If you think particularly anything in the avionics area or the spacecraft that we saw before, everything is created specifically for that product. So you've got an operating system that has been done from scratch. You've got a graphic engine that has been created from scratch. So you have to create everything by yourself. I didn't have an animation. I didn't have a transition. I didn't have a button. Actually, when I arrived in the company, they already created the button idea. You were able to press a button on the screen, but all the interactions on how the button should give the user a feedback, etc., has been something that we had to create from scratch. And you had to work closely with the developers and the engineers, and also the hardware engineers, because the hardware should be connected as well. And so it's like a super nice playground for us designers because we've got everything we can play with. At the beginning, we were crazy. We were going crazy, create something completely new. And then we realized that it was too far from something that was usable. And so after a while, you realize that you still need to create some boundaries, and you need to stick into them because otherwise you're going too far, and it takes too much time to develop something that is usable. And nice, that's a good question. We couldn't use anything that is in the market at the moment, so we tested with simple prototyping tool like Marvel Up or InVision, which were very good to show the idea of the flow in the screen. But to be able to test it properly, you need to have everything in context. So we created, so the developers and engineers created an XML environment where we could create our screens inside the screen, and we could connect the elements within parameters. And so only then you could actually test and prototype it inside the itself. And the reason of that is if you touch a knob, a physical knob, something should happen also in the software. If you touch something in the software, something should be visible also in the hardware, etc. Because the level of interaction is like, in this case, was a full level of interaction. You have human with the software, human with the hardware, hardware within the software, because there are things that are not in the human control, but still happen in the backend, in the background. And the software should see what happened in the hardware and vice versa. And the fourth level was the audio that was important every time. So, for instance, we were talking about the knobs before. So we tried to recreate the idea of the knobs on the screen. If you think at any audio tools you can have on your laptop or your desktop, there are a lot of knobs, and with the mouse you have to actually goes
I
only
hate
up
that.
and down, which doesn't make sense because the knob is rotating, but you have to go up and down. The engineers, before I joined, one of the designers, which I have to give credit to, which is, and one engineer designed that idea to create a pop-up with a rotary. You actually, with a finger on the screen, on the touch screen, you could actually follow the circle of it. Which at the beginning created some issues for the engineers because they were used to the mouse, the up and down of the mouse within the tools. But once they had it, they actually started not to use the physical knobs because it was super reliable. And it added also interesting questions for us. And we found some solutions. Something is still not working properly, probably. So for instance, if you go very far from the center of it, you can fine tune it because the more you are close to the center, the fastest you're moving, you're actually rotating. And actually the system follow that criteria. So if you go far from the center of the pop-up knob, you can fine tune, and so you can control the movement of the knob. We did a lot of A/B testing also within this knob idea on the screen. So we tested it with having just the knob without the pop-up, still rotating the pop-up, and then we had a transparent pop-up. You had only the rotation area, and then for plugins we also tested to having default coloring knobs or pop-up knobs or knobs that were following the design for the plugin, if I can say that. So there is a lot of tests you have to do. Many times you can't do it with proper users because you don't have connection with them. You have to do. We luckily had a lot of testers in our team, and we used them many times as users because they were actually sound engineers. They were testing tools. They knew exactly what they needed to create. It is not the same that testing new stuff with a new user because they were already aware about a lot of things, but still was super useful. So there are a lot of things that you have to try. And what is nice is that many times for this, so this is another thing that is important to say. We are still in a pioneering status in this domains. So in the products that are mixing digital and analog. And the reason of that is probably how expensive it is to create something like that. We are not there yet where you can just take stuff together, put them together, and they work like in the apps for the mobile now. So only big and niche projects can afford those costs. So many times you can also test and try new technologies that usually you are not able to test. Like I said, we did something related with the gesture recognition. We also thought about something related with AR and VR interactions, because AR can expand the screen to other layers. Virtual reality can even expand it more, but probably it's too much, particularly for live. But one important thing to say is that from a usability point of view, and from the user point of view, you still want to have your lightsabers physical, because you don't need to watch them. You can touch them. You can use your peripheral view and touch a fader and still looking at the the guitarist on the stage. Whether within the screen, you have to focus on the screen. So our eyes need a lot more focus on what they are looking at rather than our hands. We, of course, couldn't use anything that was related with audio, but audio would be an even better extra layer of information if needed.
Yeah, I wouldn't want that.
Because it
I'm listening to
doesn't
the
require
group.
your focus.
Yeah.
It doesn't require your focus. That's the important bit.
Just quick
Yeah,
note, we've
I
got
don't know,
5 more minutes. If you guys have any questions, it's been
woo,
very quiet out there. So if you guys have any questions about...
too many new things.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's like, "What? Faders? Am I gonna have to take a test on this?" So if you guys have any questions about anything we've been talking about, you've got 5 minutes left with us. So please do say something. I'm looking at the LinkedIn chat and the YouTube chat. Of course, another reminder, please subscribe to the Delta CX YouTube channel. It doesn't cost you anything. And you can also join me in the Slack universe, which is still a little quiet but friendly, at deltacx.link/join Slack, all one word, and that's just an open invitation. Be nice, that's the only rule. And so we'll see if anybody has any more questions. While we wait for questions, Matteo, tell everybody where they can follow you in the real world. LinkedIn, Twitter, blogs. Where can we find you?
Is it real? LinkedIn, of course. Please add me to it's Matteo Graton. You can find me easily on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter, still Matteo Graton, but I'm not using it too much. So I prefer LinkedIn. You can find me in many Slack channels, also in the Delta CX one. So if you want to have a chat, yeah. Or you can just visit me in Manchester. It's a lovely city.
That I have done. We got to meet in early December of 2019. Super fun. Wish I could come back, but of course not going anywhere right now.
Me too.
And just in case people are on the audio-only version, I'm going to spell Matteo's name so that you can find him wherever you want. You can stalk him to the ends of the world. His name is M as in Mary, A-T-T-E-O, and his last name is G-R-A-T-T-O-N as in Nancy. So you should be able to find him on your friendly neighborhood interwebs. I'm not seeing any questions. I think we blew everybody's minds today. But you know what I bet? I bet that the next time people will go to a concert, they're going to go over and look at that mixing board. And they're probably going to think
I
about...
hope so.
Yeah, they're going to think about our podcast, the podcast, and they're going to say like, I wonder if that's one of those new fancy mixing boards with the screens, or if it's one of the older style ones.
I also hope that more designers will jump on this world because it's a world where designers are super needed and it's still in the early stage. There are interesting projects. You can see stuff related with particularly, I don't know, Boeing and all the other avionics operators and companies are creating new things related with that. And they really need designers.
Yeah, we need UX specialists at all of these companies because we can't just make this pretty. We've got to make it work. We've got to make it accessible.
Exactly. It is a long journey because many times those companies are super engineering driven, which is understandable, but they don't know about design. They don't know how to deal with us, and we don't know how to deal with them because they are very focused on the hardware side of things, and the hardware is still harder than the software developers, and not because they are not open to new things, but just because they rely on, is this button working, yes or no? And so for them, they are already focused on the UX of it, but more from a reliable point of view rather than a user point of view. And they really need our help, I think. And these are an area where you can learn a lot continuously because you can't stop to learn new things every single day when you are in that environment, which is what was amazing when I was there.
So I'm getting out of my chair and taking out my headset and putting you on my speaker so that I can show everybody what I was trying to show before, because people don't know that this thing I took the picture of is actually right here. Let's see if I can angle it up. It is about 23 kilograms. So this is my old home studio. And let's see if I can get a grab on it. This is how big it is, everybody. It's about 23 kilograms. Let's see, which way do I need to go with it?
Big.
Yes. And you could use it for live, but it's also for, it's got a cassette over there where you can record. So I used to have to carry this around. Hi, I'm here. I'm your sound engineer. Hold on.
And those are only 10 channels, I think. 10 channels plus, I don't know how many outputs, but yeah.
And of course,
actually,
that was portable.
The last console you saw, the last console you saw is something I can move by myself.
Right.
Which is a super important point as well.
Oh man, I guess we got to wrap up. We are out of time. Matteo, thank you so much. Great to have you on the show, especially with a topic so close to my heart. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who sat through a fantastic lesson on the evolution of some of these digital interfaces, something probably people didn't think a lot about until they saw the SpaceX capsule. So, excuse me. So these jobs are out there. Shoes in Bitcoin, whoever that is, I forgot who that is. Everyone has these weird YouTube names. Says thank you. And we say thank you for joining. And please join me tomorrow. Of course, will be office hours. Just a couple of notes about this week, and then I will sing us out of here. Let's see. So tomorrow's office hours at 6:30 p.m. Italy time. Join if you have a question. Wednesday's podcast is going to be... Oh, we've got Celia Hodent coming on talking about gaming and UX. So it's a whole week of weird UX jobs you didn't know you could have. And then Thursday, instead of a podcast, I'm going to be giving a live stream lesson, join and ask your questions, about information architecture. Because I think it's an area that boot camps just skip over too much, and I want to teach a little of it. So join me for some free lessons. Monique is here, my new favorite New Zealander living in Germany. Loved learning more about mixing boards and seeing all the dashboards. Interesting talk. Thanks. No questions, just big thumbs up. Matteo, grazie, grazie.
Grazie a te.
And see you soon. Ci vediamo.
Italian for everyone.
Sì, ci vediamo. Grazie.
A presto. Ciao.
Sì.
Thanks for watching. Delta CX is available for consulting and projects related to CX and UX strategy, leadership, training, problem finding, problem solving, and innovation. Learn more at deltacx.com.